What if the song your daughter used to sing suddenly echoed from the lips of a child you've never met? That's what froze David Langston in place, inside his polished black Bentley, parked beside a rundown gas station on a gray Seattle. Morning, it was supposed to be just another stop, a quick break after closing a multi-million-dollar deal, a moment to breathe before boarding his jet back to New York. But the moment he saw her, a little girl wiping down the hood of his car barefoot, humming softly, everything shifted. She wasn't wearing a uniform, no parent or guardian in sight, just this tiny stranger with oil-stained cheeks and bare toes standing on cold concrete, scrubbing his luxury car like it was a holy relic. David reached for the horn, ready to scare her off. But then he heard the tune, a children's song, faint, fragile, floating through the misty air like a ghost. Not just any song, that song, the one Rachel, his wife, used to sing with their daughter Chloe on Sunday mornings. He used to pretend he was still asleep just to hear them laugh in the kitchen. But after the accident, silence became his only soundtrack, and now, out of nowhere, the melody returned, carried by a voice too familiar for comfort. His hand froze above the horn, his breath caught. The girl kept singing, eyes closed, lost in her own world. Her small hands clutched a rag that looked like an old T-shirt, moving slowly over the glossy hood. Every note she sang was wrapped in something raw, something that made David's pulse race for the first time in years. It wasn't just the melody, it was the way she sang it. Gentle, honest, heartbreakingly pure. Before he even knew what he was doing, he opened the door. The click of the handle echoed louder than expected. His footsteps tapped across the pavement, and the girl flinched. She stopped singing, but didn't run. She turned and looked up at him, calm, curious, not afraid. He towered over her in a $1,000 suit and a watch worth more than most homes. But in that moment, he was the one who felt small. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked, voice cracked and dry. The girl tilted her head. "My mom used to sing it to me," she said, "before she left." His stomach dropped. "What's your mother's name?" he managed to whisper. The girl hesitated, glancing at the gas station's door as if unsure whether to run. Then she looked back at him. Rachel Moore. Time stopped. David's world blurred. The name echoed in his skull like a gunshot. Rachel Moore, his wife's name. The name carved into a marble headstone 2 years ago. And their daughter, Chloe, was supposed to have died with her. He staggered back a step. This couldn't be real. It had to be a cruel coincidence, a random overlap. But the song, the voice, the eyes. The girl shut her eyes again and started to sing. Same melody, but now there was pain in it. Like the song itself remembered, David fell to his knees. His designer trousers tore on the pavement, but he didn't feel it. Tears came fast, hot, and uninvited. He covered his face, breath heaving, heart torn wide open. "Are you okay, mister?" the girl asked gently. He couldn't answer. Not yet, because the real question, the one tearing him apart inside, wasn't, "Am I okay?" It was this: who is she? And how does she know my life's most painful song? David stared at the girl like he was seeing a ghost. She didn't run, didn't look afraid. She just stood there, humming quietly again, eyes closed as if the chaos in his chest didn't exist. He took a step closer, crouching to meet her at eye level. "What's your name?" he asked, voice softer now. She hesitated, then answered, "Sophie Moore." His breath caught again. He almost asked, "Chloe?" but stopped himself. The girl, no, Sophie, had Rachel's eyes, dark, deep, the kind of eyes that held too much for someone her age. "How old are you?" "I think I'm 7, she said. "You think?" She nodded. "I don't remember everything. But the lady who takes care of me says I was about 5 when I came to live with her." "Who's the lady?" "Her name's Evelyn Brooks. She's nice. She found me at the shelter." David's thoughts started spinning. "A shelter?" Sophie looked down, tracing circles on the hood of the car with her finger. "I had a note in my backpack," she said. "It said, 'Please take care of her.' That's what Evelyn told me. And there was a drawing." One I made, I think. It had a sun and a tree and 3 people. Her voice dropped lower. One of them was a woman. One was a man. The last one was me. David swallowed hard. His hand trembled slightly. Do you still have the drawing? Sophie reached into the back pocket of her jeans and carefully unfolded a small, creased piece of paper. She handed it to him. David opened it like it was a sacred scroll. There it was, a childish sketch, a bright yellow sun, a green hill. A crooked house with a lopsided tree, and 3 stick figures holding hands. Below it, in clumsy handwriting, Mommy, me, and Daddy. He stared at the drawing as if it were proof of the impossible. You made this? He asked, barely above a whisper. Sophie shrugged. It was already in my backpack when I got to Evelyn's. I don't remember drawing it, but I like it. David's knees went weak again. It wasn't just the content of the drawing, it was the shape of the tree, the way the arms were drawn. Tiny. Details only Chloe would have added, but she was gone. They'd said the current swept her away, that no body was ever found. They buried an empty coffin, and, with it, he buried his soul. His voice shook. Do you remember your mother? Sophie looked up, just how she used to sing, like the song I was singing earlier. Each word hit like a hammer, somewhere in the deepest part of his chest. Something cracked open, something buried under 2 years of silence and pain. Hope. It wasn't loud, it wasn't certain, but it was there, flickering like a candle, trying to survive the wind. David knelt again, eye to eye with her. I need to ask you something important, he said. Do you have anything else? Anything that belonged to your mom? Sophie thought for a second, then slowly pulled something else from her other pocket, a gold bracelet, small, engraved with a single name. Chloe? He staggered backward like he'd been punched. That was Rachel's gift, the one they gave Chloe on her 5th birthday. It had gone missing after the accident. His hands trembled as he held it. Where did you get this? He asked. I always had it, she said simply. It makes me feel safe. David looked at her again, this time not just with doubt, but with belief. She wasn't just a girl. She might be his girl, but he needed to be sure. He stood, pulled out his phone, and called Michael, his most trusted assistant. I need everything on a girl named Sophie Moore, he said. 7 years old, dropped at a shelter in Tacoma 2 years ago. And check Rachel's accident report. I want to know if anything was off. Michael's voice tightened. Is this serious? David's reply was cold, sharp, final. I've never been more serious in my life. He hung up, looked down at Sophie, and knew this was no coincidence. Something had been hidden, and now he was going to uncover it, no matter the cost. The sun had barely shifted in the overcast sky when David and Sophie arrived at a small roadside diner. She chose the booth by the window, her feet dangling above the floor, her hands wrapped around a sandwich like it was treasure. David barely touched his food. He couldn't stop watching her, the way she counted her fries before eating them, how she wrinkled her nose while chewing. Chloe used to do those things, but his mind wouldn't allow him to believe blindly. Coincidence wasn't enough. He had asked Michael to dig deeper, and now every vibration from his phone felt like it might deliver either salvation or devastation. Have you ever been here before? David asked gently. Sophie looked around the diner. No, but one of the pictures on the wall looks like my old school. David froze. What was the name? She paused, eyes drifting to the ceiling. I think something with mountain, like Green Mountain? His heart skipped. Greenmount Academy, that was Chloe's preschool before the accident. The pieces were aligning too well, and yet something still felt off, too convenient, too eerie. Then the door to the diner opened. David instinctively glanced over. Just a family entering. He exhaled, then froze again as he noticed something else. A black SUV had pulled into the gas station across the street. Tinted windows. Parked. Awkwardly, 2 men got out, one on the phone, the other scanning the diner, casually but intentionally. David's instincts, the same ones that had made him a titan in boardrooms full of predators, kicked in. Finish your juice, Sophie, he said calmly, forcing a smile. We're leaving in 5 minutes. She nodded unaware. David threw down cash, grabbed her hand, and walked her out, his eyes never leaving the SUV. They reached the Bentley. He buckled her in, then circled to the driver's side. But before he could get in, one of the men started. Walking fast toward them, David gunned the engine. The Bentley surged forward just as the man reached the rear bumper. They sped away down the highway, Sophie silent, eyes wide. "Who were those men?" she asked. "I don't know," David lied. "But I'm going to find out." His hands trembled on the wheel. His phone buzzed. "Michael." David pulled over and answered. "David," Michael said, breathless. "We found the shelter records. Sophie was registered under that name. But the woman who dropped her off used a fake ID. And more than that, there are discrepancies in Rachel's autopsy report." David's blood ran cold. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Signatures don't match. The timeline's off." "Someone covered something up." Michael's voice dropped lower. "I'm sending everything to your email, but this isn't just negligence. This was a deliberate cover-up." David ended the call. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Everything he believed about Rachel's death, Chloe's supposed drowning, it was all unraveling. And whoever had orchestrated it wasn't. Done, he looked at Sophie, so small, so vulnerable. And then she whispered, "Sometimes Evelyn talks on the phone and cries after. I think she's scared of someone." David turned to her slowly. "Do you know who she talks to?" She shook her head, but David knew what he had to do next. Find Evelyn. Find the truth. They drove in silence for nearly an hour, through rain-slicked roads and neighborhoods stained with time. Finally, they pulled up to a modest house with peeling paint and a porch cluttered with potted plants. "That's the one," Sophie said softly. "Where Evelyn lives." David stepped out. Sophie's voice followed him. "Are you going to yell at her?" "No," he said. "I just need answers." He knocked. The door creaked open. Evelyn stood there, older than he remembered from the file photo. Her hands trembled around a manila envelope. "David Langston," she whispered. "I knew this day would come." He didn't waste time. "Is she my daughter?" Tears filled her eyes. "Please, come in." The house smelled of old bread and memories. David remained standing as Evelyn sat across from him, gripping the envelope like a lifeline. "I was there," she began, "at the hospital. The day. They brought Rachel in. Chloe was with her. Alive." David's eyes narrowed. "They told me she died in the river." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's what they told you." "But someone showed up. A man. Said he was family, had documents. Took her away." David's voice darkened. "What man?" She opened the envelope and slid a faded photo across the table. A man in a black cap, sunglasses, holding a child. His face was partly obscured, but David knew that jawline, that posture. Victor Hale, his former business partner, the man David had exposed for embezzlement, the man he had destroyed. And now, Victor had destroyed him. Back. David stood frozen, the photo of Victor Hale burning in his hands like a brand. His mind reeled with rage, betrayal, and something far more dangerous. Clarity. Victor had taken everything. Rachel. Chloe. And now? He had almost taken Sophie again. But no more. At the police station, David filed an official report. He handed over the photo, the shelter records, even the drawing Sophie carried. Detectives nodded, scribbled notes, promised they'd investigate. But David knew bureaucracy well. It moved. Slow. Too slow. And when children were involved, even slower. Back at the hospital, David lay in a bed with bruised ribs and dried blood on his shirt. His face was stitched. His body ached. But none of it hurt as much as the silence, because Sophie, his daughter, wasn't in the next room. She had been taken into protective custody, placed under state review, pending verification of their relationship. Standard procedure, they said. Just temporary, they said. But it felt like losing her all over again. 2 days passed. David watched the door, praying it would open. It didn't until the 3rd day. That afternoon it finally creaked open, And Sophie walked in, holding a small blue notebook. A social worker stood behind her. Jessica Nguyen, calm but stern. "You have 10 minutes," she said. "No promises, no physical contact." David didn't care. He would have settled for 10 seconds. Sophie walked up slowly, her eyes tracing the bandages on his face. "Hi," she whispered. He smiled, broken but genuine. "Hi, Sophie. You feeling okay?" She nodded. "Every time I see you, I feel more okay." She fidgeted with her notebook. "They asked if I wanted to go live with another family." David held his breath. "And what did you say?" he asked. She looked into his eyes, steady and clear. "I said, I want to stay with you." His throat tightened. He couldn't speak, so she opened the notebook and handed it to him. Inside, she had drawn a picture of them sitting in a park, holding hands, a dog beside them. There was belonging in that sketch, something no court could define. But David knew it. She was choosing him. But the state wasn't so sure. 2 days later, the custody hearing began. The courtroom was cold, both in temperature and in spirit. Dark wood walls, fluorescent lights, and a judge with gray hair and a stare that could split stone. Judge Harrison. David wore a charcoal suit, unshaven but composed, across the aisle. The state attorney scrolled through files like he was reading grocery lists. Sophie wasn't allowed in the room. Too traumatic, they said. But everything said in that courtroom would decide whether David could ever be her father again. "Mr. Langston," the judge began, "you've filed for full custody of Sophie Moore. The state expresses concern over your recent instability, the altercation involving alleged kidnappers, and your emotional volatility. What do you have to say?" David stood. "I've made mistakes," he said. "Too many." He looked around the room, then back at the judge. "When my wife died, I didn't just lose her. I lost me. And when they told me my daughter was gone, I believed them, because I couldn't bear to hope." A pause, a breath. "But now, I've been given a second chance. Not to rewrite the past, but to do better now." The judge listened, but her expression didn't change. The state attorney stood next. "Your Honor, we ask the court to consider the child's safety. This man may be emotionally invested, but emotional attachment is not proof of parental stability." David's attorney, a sharp, seasoned advocate, stood calmly. "We'd like to submit the report of Dr. Susan Reinhardt, the child psychologist who evaluated Sophie over the past 48 hours. Permission granted." The letter was read aloud. Sophie, it stated, had formed an extraordinary emotional bond with David, a mutual healing process. To remove her now, it warned, could cause irreversible trauma. The courtroom went quiet, and then the door opened. Evelyn Brooks walked in. David's heart stopped. The woman who had once hidden Sophie now stood straight, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice did not. "I lived with that girl for 2 years," Evelyn said. "But not once did she ever call me Dad." She looked at the judge. She called David that. "The day she met him, and sometimes, Your Honor, children know more than we do." The judge remained silent, then said softly, "A ruling will be issued in 48 hours." Gavel dropped. Court adjourned. Outside, David found Sophie drawing with chalk. On the courthouse steps, she looked up at him with a smile. "Is it going to be okay?" she asked. David knelt, pain shooting through his ribs. "We already are," he whispered. "We're just waiting for the paperwork to catch up." But what? He didn't know. Was that Victor Hale wasn't finished, and the system they were fighting went deeper than either of them imagined. That night, David couldn't sleep. Even with the court's decision pending, something wasn't right. An old instinct stirred in his chest, the same one that had helped him survive boardrooms full of predators. But this wasn't about business. This was about something darker. Someone out there didn't want the truth to come out, and they were running out of time. Sophie slept peacefully in the guest room of Evelyn's house. They had been staying there under court orders, a neutral location while custody was reviewed. But David didn't feel safe. Around 2 a.m. he got out of bed, padded quietly down the hallway, and opened Sophie's door. She was there, curled up with her notebook in her arms, the gold bracelet on her wrist catching the moonlight. Chloe, Sophie, his daughter. He closed the door softly, only to freeze at the sound of a click downstairs. Every hair on his neck stood on end. Barefoot, silent, he grabbed the iron fire poker by the fireplace and crept into the living room. Nothing moved. But the back window, it was open. And then a shadow moved behind him. David spun, poker raised. "If you hit me, you won't hear what I came to say," said a voice, Victor Hale. But this time he was alone. No suit, no goons, just a man, hollowed out. David didn't lower the weapon. "What do you want?" Victor raised his hands slowly. "I came to finish what I started, but not the way you think." David stared. "You kidnapped my daughter." "I didn't know she was yours," Victor replied, voice tight. "Not at first. I just wanted to hurt you, to make you feel what I felt." He ran a hand over his face. He looked older, broken. "But then I held her, and she wasn't leverage. She was a mirror. She made me see everything I had become." David didn't speak. Victor reached into his jacket slowly and placed a USB drive on the table. "It's all there," he said. "Emails, footage, signed documents, the people who helped fake the accident report, the judge who looked the other way, the hospital staff who were paid off." David's eyes narrowed. "Why now?" Victor's voice cracked. "Because, for the first time in my life, I want to do something right, even if it's too late for me." He turned to leave, then stopped. "If you turn me in, I get it, but maybe if you don't, she'll grow up in a world with a little less hate." Then he walked out into the night. David stood frozen, in his hand, the key to everything. Upstairs, Sophie was still sleeping, but by tomorrow her entire world would change. The next morning, the courthouse was packed. Reporters, activists, attorneys. The story had gone public. A billionaire CEO found his long-lost daughter. The system fought him, and now he was fighting back with proof. Jessica led Sophie into the courtroom, hair brushed, pale blue dress, crayons in her lap. David stood beside her, holding the USB drive. The judge, not the same woman as before, was a new appointee, serious, respected, sharp-eyed. "Mr. Langston," he said, "you may make your final statement." David nodded. "Your Honor," he began, "this isn't just about custody, it's about what we choose to do when life gives us a second chance. I lost my wife, I lost my daughter, and I lost myself, but when I found her again, I realized not. All stories end with a period. Some just need someone willing to rewrite them." He turned to Sophie. "I'm not asking for permission to be her father. I'm taking responsibility because she chose me." The prosecutor stood, but something had shifted. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. "In light of the new material," she said, "including documents implicating multiple judicial figures, the state no longer opposes full custody. We also recommend the child's original birth name be restored." The judge reviewed the files. Silence stretched like a held breath. Then, finally, "This court recognizes that Sophie Moore, born Chloe Langston, is the biological and legal daughter of Mr. David Langston. Full custody is granted. Case closed." The courtroom exploded in murmurs. David didn't hear a thing, because the only sound that mattered was the scrape of the chair beside him as Sophie threw her arms around him and whispered, "Daddy, can we go home now?" David held her tighter than ever. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going home." Outside the courthouse, the wind was softer. Maybe it was just the season, or maybe, for the first time in a very long time, David Langston could finally breathe. Sophie held his hand tightly, her little fingers wrapped around his like a promise she didn't need to speak aloud. Evelyn stood nearby, watching with a mix of quiet pride and sorrow. She had chosen to move to a small coastal town, start fresh, but before leaving, she knelt in front of Sophie. "Your mom asked me to give this to you," she said gently, handing her a small velvet box. Sophie opened it slowly. Inside was a simple gold bracelet, delicate, handmade, engraved with one word, Chloe. Her eyes shimmered. "Can I still be Sophie, too?" she asked almost in a whisper. David knelt beside her, voice steady. You can be anything you want, Sophie. Chloe, you're my miracle. Days later, they moved into their new house. It wasn't massive, but it was theirs, a modest home just outside the city, with a backyard big enough for dreams. And in that yard, a golden retriever puppy chased a red toy across the grass, ears flopping, tail wagging like joy itself. Sophie had named him Sul, she'd declared. No reason. It just feels like his name. David had laughed for the first time in what felt like years. One afternoon, while Sophie played, David sat on the porch with a notebook. He opened it and began to write. But it wasn't a memo, not a letter to investors, not a speech. It was a letter to Rachel. Today, she called me Daddy, with ice cream on her lips and dirt on her feet, and for a second, I swear I heard your laugh in the wind. I promise I'll take care of her, with everything I have left, not because I'm strong, but because she is, and because you taught me what love really means. He folded the letter and placed it gently in the bracelet box. Then he and Sophie planted a small tree in the backyard. They buried the box beneath it, roots tangled with memory. As the sun dipped low, painting gold across the sky, Sophie ran barefoot across the lawn. Her laughter filled the air, light and untamed. The puppy barked and followed, tripping over his own. Pause. David watched from the porch, hands in his pockets, heart finally still. For once there were no more questions, no more trials, no more waiting, just this. A second chance. A real one. Sophie ran up to him breathless. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart. When we grow the tree. Bigger. Can we build a swing on it? David smiled. We'll build whatever you want, even a tree house. Really? Really? Because this time I'm not going anywhere. And in that moment he knew it was never about courtrooms or blood tests. It was about showing up every day, even when you're scared. Because in the end, fatherhood wasn't a title. It was a choice, and he had made it. Forever. Ending beat. Optional voiceover close for video. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because sometimes the best family is the one you fight to keep. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.